Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Dawn Lane, and I am the Program Development and Implementation Manager for the Massey Learning Institute. Today's session, entitled Managing Waste in the COVID-19 Pandemic, will be presented by Mrs. Sian Cuffy-Young. This is a timely topic, a little different from what we would normally offer, but we are living in a pandemic. The world is living in a pandemic. Most of us are working remotely. Are we really aware of the waste we're generating? I mean, the food containers, the extra cling wrap, the vegetable peelings, and add to that the COVID waste that we're generating. Our gloves, our masks, our wipes, and the many varying shapes of hand sanitizer bottles, and the list can go on. But where is it all going, and how is it really affecting us and our environment? So that's why we wanted to bring this session to you today, and that is why Sian Cuffy-Young is here to speak with you. A little bit about Sian. Sian has been involved in the environmental field for over 15 years. She's worked in the mining and waste management industries. Sian has a wealth of experience in environmental management systems and has received training in behavioral change with the University of Tennessee. She is a Colorado certified environmental educator. She's a speaker and principal consultant of Sial Environmental Services Limited. Her academic qualifications include a Bachelor of Science honors degree, double major in physics, and a master's in environmental engineering from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. She also has a diploma in environmental management from the Galilee College in Israel. Sian is also a Fulbright Hubert Humphrey Fellow from Cornell University and is a graduate of the prestigious Shell Livewire program for young and upcoming entrepreneurs. She was recently awarded the Kenneth Valley Foundation Progress Award for her work in environmentalism and advocacy. Wow, now that's a lot, and it isn't even all. But before we get started, just a little housekeeping. Remember, if you have any questions or comments during the presentation, please type them in the question and answer box. We will have a Q&A segment at the end of the session to respond to as many questions as our time permits. If someone posts a question which you wanted to ask, remember to click the thumbs up icon by that question. This will further help us in selecting questions which you are keen to have answered. So it is indeed a pleasure to hand you over to Sian Cuffy-Young. Welcome, Sian.
Thank you very much, Dawn, and thank you to the MLI team for having me here this morning. It's very exciting for me to be here. I am grinning from ear to ear. So thank you so much. So as Dawn mentioned, right now we are in the throes of a pandemic. And as such, as waste educators, as waste managers, we have seen our waste changing because we now have to deal with other forms of waste that we would not have normally had to. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about that and about, how can we bring everything together and manage our waste together. So let me start by sharing my screen. So today's discussion is going to be about managing waste in a pandemic. And of course, I had to choose I saw that picture and I laughed because we all at some point, even today, we're just about ready for COVID-19 to just be out of here, right? So how are we going to look at managing our waste moving forward? So Dawn shared a lot, but some of the things that she did mention, the fun things about me, because yes, I am a human being too. I have a healthy fear of snakes. I do not like them. I respect their role in the ecosystem, but yeah, I run in the other direction. I was also once a professional hip hop dancer and made it all the way to the World Hip Hop Championships in 2005. I don't look like I have a hip hop bone in my body, but yes, that is true. And I also do enjoy singing. I have sang with one of our leading choirs in Trinidad and Tobago called the Marionettes Chorale for about 13 years. I'm now a mom of 3 and a wife to 1. So that's just a little bit about me. And so let me just give you a little bit of a backstory about why I'm doing this in the first place. I started SIL. This year is our 5-year anniversary. And when I was 10 years old, my father used to take my brother and I swimming to Chagaramas, which is in the western part of the island in Trinidad and Tobago. And my father is about 6'2", and so relatively tall guy. And he used to open his legs, and my brother and I would swim through his legs. That was our game. Don't judge me. It was fun, right? So my brother went first. I never opened my eyes underwater because I just had this huge fear that something would, just one big fish would swim, and I don't know, I just had this huge fear of opening my eyes underwater. So my turn to swim through daddy's legs. I would gauge, the science in me. I estimated how many strokes I had. And then I swam through daddy's legs, and something did hit me in my face, and I jumped out of the water. And I jumped out of the water and I opened my eyes. It was a loaded pamper. So to me, I tell people, and I tell you guys, that I have a very personal experience with waste. That experience changed my life forever. 2 things happened. 1, I told my dad never to take us there again, which he didn't. My 10-year-old self was very, very grateful. And 2, I found that we were very nasty. I was 10 years old, so that's the word that came to my mind. We were very nasty as a people. And even at that age, I wanted to do something about it. My father, who has been in scouting for about 45 years, longer than I've been on the earth, taught my brother and I from a really young age, the conservation law, which is you always leave a place cleaner than you've met it. So that is what I use in my daily life. I still believe in that. He had us picking up after people even from before 10. And that principle is now what I teach to my own children. So I want to start today's discussion by saying with this quote from Annie Leonard, which is one of my favorite. There's no such thing as a way. When you throw anything away, it must go somewhere. Because sometimes I'm getting the idea that people think that, okay, so they throw away their garbage and it just ends up in perpetuity or floating somewhere. But when you throw your garbage away, somebody else, it now becomes someone else's responsibility. Some other organization has to manage it. In Trinidad and Tobago, and most of where you guys are as well, there are landfills. An organization is responsible for the management of those landfills or the management of material recovery facilities. Somebody has to deal with it. So there's no such thing as a way. So we have to make that switch in our minds that we're not just throwing anything away, because it's not just going to disappear. It is going to become someone else's responsibility. So we now have to start rethinking how we see and act towards waste. So I want us to start by taking a step back. One of the things that we have realized as well is that, sadly, the horse is out of the stable and it's out there talking and liming with his, as we say in Trinidad and Tobago, liming, hanging out with his friends, having good old conversations, right? But essentially, when we're talking about sustainable waste management, the goal is to make less waste, period, punto final. The goal is to make less waste. So we now have to look at what we have here, which is the waste management hierarchy, and go back to how we are supposed to be managing waste. And the thing is, the goal for waste management is Sustainable Development Goal 12, which talks about responsible consumption and production. And the 2 things are equally as important. The consumers alone cannot take the brunt of the responsibility. nor the producers alone take the brunt of the blame for waste and waste management. Both things, we both have a role to play. So prevention is first, or refusal. If you don't need it, don't take it, which is the most preferred. Then we have reduction, we have recycle. Recovery simply means that after we've tried reduction, reuse, and recycling, and prevention, of course, if all of those have not worked, then we go to recovery, which is we take waste and turn it into some other valuable product. Here you have things like waste to energy plants, anaerobic digesters, and so on. And then we get to disposal. When we look at our homes, same principles apply. We have reduce, reuse, refill. I know in the US there is a huge refilling, a huge refilling practice. You know, I remember the first time I went to the States and I went to Burger King, and my uncle told me, you know, you could just go and refill your cup of soft drink. I was like, what? I was the happiest camper, right? So in Trinidad and Tobago and in the Caribbean, we're now getting into that habit. If something is broken, fix it. Repurposing, which is the whole theory of upcycling. We have replace only when absolutely necessary, then recycle, use the bin, and to landfill. So we want to make less waste, we want to practice reuse, and then we want to recycle and recover any waste that is produced. So generally here, when we talk about these 8 forms of waste, so we have the tangible and we also have the intangible. And these are the 8 processes that we could also eliminate waste as well. We have long waiting periods for certain items to be made or to receive certain items. That time is being wasted, right? Transportation, I'll just go through a few. Transportation as well. In terms of the transport of the materials back and forth, you have traffic, inventory. Sometimes we have this idea where we just need to make more, and that's not necessarily the case. Overproduction, overprocessing. We have human capacity that we're not tapping into. If you have people in your organizations that you're really not tapping into their skills, then you're wasting their intellect. You have motion, and of course, the effects are pretty self-explanatory. So one of the things in waste as well, especially with the pandemic, is we have to start documenting, right? Because we need to track where our waste is ending up. There's no more out of sight, out of mind. And when I say sight, I mean both SIGHT and SITE, right? You guys are responsible, and those who are dealing with products and so on are responsible for what happens to the waste after it leaves you. Do you know where it's going? Do you know who is managing it? Are you sure they're managing it in an environmentally responsible manner? And all of these questions must be answered, because you can't just say, okay, well, I put it in the compactor, or I threw it out in the dumpster, and that's it. No, you have to take responsibility for where that waste ends up. So therefore, do you have any documentation process, or what we simply like to call a chain of custody form? Normally you see that for CSI. For those of you that like watching crime shows like me, you know about CSIs, right? And they have to track their in how they gather the evidence and so on. The same principle applies to waste as well, right? We need to make sure that after it leaves our premises, that we know exactly what's happening to it. And we also need to ask ourselves, is there anything better that I can do to make sure it's managed properly? Because remember, I talked about the hierarchy and all of those other things we should be doing with our waste before it even gets thrown away, right? Before it even gets to the bin. So am I utilizing any of those principles? You need to ask yourself those questions and work with your waste haulers or your waste transportation people to get that done as well. So in COVID-19, what we have found as well is that the waste associated is, special things, the gloves, the masks, and so on, which must be handled separately. And let me explain what I mean. If someone is in the office, because we're in a pandemic and people are not supposed to come to the office sick, right? Or they're not supposed to come to work in the stores sick, right? But sometimes I live in a household where all the men in my household have sinus issues. So they're always snorting, they're always rubbing their noses, they sneeze from time to time, right? So the thing is, if you have people who have similar issues, then that waste actually should be kept separate from your regular garbage, because the standard is 72 hours. And here too, when I get into that in the next slide as well, is where we need to that's why reusable masks like mine, right, is important, because we want to remember the goal is to make less waste. So what essentially would happen is that all those masks and gloves should be kept separately, double bagged, left for 72 hours, and then put out with the rest of the garbage. The 72 hours on the double bag, and the heat in the double bag will help to break down any bacteria, because remember, some people are asymptomatic, will help break down any bacteria that may be there. And the 72 hours is just the time frame needed, so that that is the time frame for the virus to die, right? So as much as possible, I know and I'm not one of those foolhardy waste educators or experts that realizing that no, we have to be safe, right? But I also do understand that these huge amounts of waste that we may not necessarily have had to deal with. Remember, gloves and masks are what is called clinical or medical waste. They were only generated in our hospitals, and as such, they would only be incinerated in our hospitals. Now, the general public, you guys, your family, are wearing masks and gloves. We never had to do that before. So our goal is, yes, that's why we want to employ the principles of reuse wherever possible. So reusable masks, put the nice Massy logo on it, and that people feel, all nice that they have their company's logo on their mask and so on. For us to wherever possible. Because remember, said I'm not foolhardy. I know that there are some instances where we have no choice but to use the disposable options, but we also have to practice reuse and refill. One of my colleagues, actually, she makes hand sanitizers in glass bottles. And so when your hand sanitizer bottle is empty, you can return the same bottle to get refilled. Because remember, these forms of waste were only created in our hospitals, and medical waste or clinical waste should be incinerated. But because the general public is now wearing these things and using these things more often, we have to treat it separately. Right? So my admonition to you is to do the same, because we're finding now that masks are entering into our waters, that masks are that the animals are now feeding on masks and bits and pieces of plastic gloves, and that defeats the whole purpose. As I said, Mother Earth, she was relaxing in a chair, having a good old time when everybody was locked down, and now she's like, oh my God, what is going on? So we really have to do our part to reduce some of the waste that we are generating. So I would encourage you to set up some kind of policy and program. I'm sure you guys do now. If you have, this is just a reiteration of that, so that you manage all that special COVID-19 waste, which is separate from the organic waste and all of that that is generated separately. So often the last piece of the puzzle is organic waste. And as such, for most of us, especially in the islands, the greatest percentage of the waste that we generate, both on a national level and household level, is organic. And one of the things that we are encouraging people to do right now is to learn the process of composting. Just a skill that everybody is supposed to do. I don't know why we all aren't doing it yet. But also for companies, we also have some other options that can be available. The bin or specially designed compost bins, where they are placed at your site, removed, and then we make the finished material and return the finished product to you. You have the one in the middle, option B, that makes the compost. You collect it, open the orange door, and you get your compost. Or option C, which is the really high-tech option, which is also available, that makes compost in 24 hours. So you have from between 8 to 12 weeks, 4 weeks, and then 24 hours as those options. So that brings me to my part of the presentation. I hope you guys were able to understand everything that I've said thus far, and to just reiterate to you that this pandemic is causing us to do a lot of rethinking, a lot of repositioning. One of the things that I also wanted to mention is that it also gives us opportunity to look at what we're doing and make it better, opportunity to introduce new activities into our processes. One of my favorite activities is called a naked fruit campaign, where, Mother Earth created the fruit by themselves. They didn't have clothes on. So why are we putting clothes on the fruit? So it's something that you can, you can practice as well too in your different organizations. Look at naked fruits and see what that is, because the goal, as I said, is really to make less waste. That is the whole premise of this activity. With this pandemic, the other thing, as well as I mentioned, is for you to manage it well, to reuse and refill as much as possible. If you can't do it, align yourselves with organizations that can provide those kinds of services to you so that we make less waste. And remember, because it's not always about doing things better, but sometimes we simply need to do better things.
That is fantastic, Shawn. I wanted you to technically, your nice funnel, you had a slide with a funnel. Can you go through that a bit more for me? It was a lovely funnel, maybe slide 2 or 3.
Yes,
I thought it was interesting. Yeah, yes. If you could just go through that so that we could get the gist.
Sure. Okay. So the funnel on the left and the image on the right are both similar. The one on the left is what we would use for our homes, and if we're generating what I wouldn't call as extremely large amounts of waste. But when we are talking about manufacturing and production and all of that, that's where the square comes in. So let's go to the funnel on the left. So the first R, I call these my 7 R's, right? So the first R that you don't see there, but it is in the square, is called refuse or prevention. If you don't need it, don't take it, right? Because oftentimes we have this way, I don't know, maybe it's a Caribbean thing where we want to take 3 and 4, but it's just one of us, right? If we don't need all of those things, don't take it. The other one is reduce. We have to start cutting down the amount of waste that we're generating. I know now, especially when we're at home, these are, where and that's why reduction and reuse, they work hand in hand with each other, because in the process of reusing, you are reducing at the same time. So I remember my mom said when she was a young girl, she would buy, it's an Indian delicacy that we call anchar, right? And the lady in the store would serve the anchar on a banana leaf. And she would say, Shawn, and the anchar was so delicious. We used to lick the leaf. I was like, so mommy, y'all didn't know if the lady was washing the leaf properly? She's like, we couldn't care, right? So at that time, a lot of reuse, if I make my macaroni pie, I make it in my glass dish. I give it to you, Dawn, you enjoy the pie, you wash the dish, and you return it to me. But now we find that we're putting things in these disposable containers and just generating more and more and more waste. And I think that also has a lot to do with our consumption patterns have increased, and convenience as well. Convenience for us in the waste world has become more of a problem, because in the act of convenience, we use single-use plastics, and I know a lot of the countries that are tuning into us today have banned single-use plastics. Jamaica has banned it, Grenada has banned it. So we have a lot of, Antigua was the first country to ban plastic bags. So a number of our, of our countries, Guyana has banned styrofoam. So a number of our countries have banned these items, and it's causing problems. More and more animals are dying because they're ingesting floating plastic bags and so on. Then we have refill. So if it's empty, you go back, you get your refill. I'm encouraging some of my other business entrepreneur friends who have products to practice the principle of refilling. Is there something that you guys can do that would also work in the refill practice as well? Can people return certain things? Repair and repurpose, because now when things broken, we don't want to fix it anymore. What happened to fixing things? The whole thing with repurposing is where we have upcycling. I have beautiful, I've seen story after story. I have a friend that turns old vinyl records into clocks. I have another colleague that makes books out of recycled paper. I have another one that makes lamps out of glass bottles. So the possibilities are endless. Only after we've done all of those, we replace and then we recycle. And recycling is making a new product out of an old one. So you see how many R's, you see how wide, that's why the top of the funnel is so wide, and we taper down as we go before it even gets to the bin. So that's just the principle that I want to encourage you guys to practice as well, whether it's at home, whether it's in the store, whether it's in the office, to to start paying attention to these things and asking yourselves, what else can I do? How else can I make this better? So I hope it's clear enough.
Yes, very much. Thank you. So what we're going to do, Shan, first, I want to say I never thought that, you know it, you hear about it, but when it comes home to you, let's put it that way, when it comes home to you and you really are stuck with how are we going to preserve what's left of our environment or clean up our environment, managing waste could actually be very exciting. What I'm going to do now, and I can show you in our question and answer segment, some of the questions that are really showing that persons are taking a unique interest in how they can care for their environment. So Shawn, what I'm going to do now is hand you over to Renee Barnett, who will be moderating the Q&A segment, and we'll just go through our questions.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Shawn. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. All right, great. So our first question is from Gail. Could we get tips on composting? My experience has been rotting heaps of peelings.
So Gail, first thing I would tell you is that composting is the happy marriage of that, because you could have unhappy marriages, right? The happy marriage between what is in your kitchen and what comes from your yard, right? And I actually told Dawn that I wanted to have, so you see, Dawn, we could have the home composting workshop, right? Where I can teach you guys how to compost the right way, because it is that mix of what is coming from your kitchen and what is in your yard that makes composting happen. If you're not doing those two things, then you're just letting the natural process of decomposition. You're going to get that nice, beautiful juice that's normally created when your fruit is decomposing, right? So that's what it's going to be slushy. It's going to smell, right? Compost doesn't smell at all. I actually have a picture where I'm like this close to my compost and I'm not smelling anything outside. And I'm like, keep smelling it all the time just to see. And it's unbelievable to believe that what I just emptied that may have had a smell, I put it this close to my nose and there is nothing. So you have to marry what is from the kitchen and what is in the yard. And they mix together, and composting is all about how you layer as well. So we are going to have, as I was telling Dawn, now we have the reason to have the home composting workshop so that I can teach you guys, because that's a whole other session. You all will have me here for another hour, and we don't want to do that, right? Because I know you guys have to go back to work and to your families. So I would tell you, Gail, that you're not composting right now, because if it's that slushy and it's just your peelings only, that's just the natural process of decomposition. You have to have a mix, and the mix has to have the right carbon to nitrogen ratio to be able to be compost, right? Other than that, you'll have me on here for a whole hour, and I want to be able to answer all the other questions. So stay tuned for what's coming, right?
Thank you so much, Shawn. Okay, our next question is from an anonymous person. What are your comments on the management of electronic waste globally, and what do you recommend for the region?
You're asking me some tough questions here. Okay, so let me start with Trinidad and Tobago first today. Now, e-waste globally, we recognize that, and it's actually called waste of electrical and electronic equipment. So it's not just those items that you plug in, but also battery operated equipment. So that qualifies what e-waste is, right? The other thing too is that because it contains hazardous components, because your cell phone has both precious metals like gold, platinum, but it also has lead, arsenic in your cell phone, right? So because of that, and because most of us, especially in the Caribbean region, use landfilling as our last method of disposal for waste, it should not be accepted at any of our landfill sites. Electronic waste should be broken down, opened up into its constituent parts, because each part of your phone or your laptop, it's plastic, there's metal, there are those precious metals that I mentioned, but there's also those hazardous components. So we have to set up separate systems to deal with electronic waste. In Trinidad and Tobago, we do have a number of e-waste recyclers that do that, but we don't have a local mechanism to treat with it. So it is shipped outside of the country for proper management. But we also have to be careful, because in some countries they're telling you, yes, we accept it, but when you look at it, it's child labor, and the children and the elderly exposed to all of these harmful components as well. To we actually had a situation where there was open dumping of e-waste, which led to lead poisoning, right? We had that particular area had high there was some chemical waste that was just dumped, but we also had a situation where we had thousands of computers just piled one on top of the other, like somebody just offloaded a truck. So for us in the region, we have to understand that it has to be treated as a separate item because of its harmful components. And there are a number of technologies that are out there now that were not available, let's say 10 years ago, to effectively manage electronic waste, but it requires us to make an investment and to understand that it also forms part of what we call hazardous waste management. So not just actually the industrial waste from the factories and the plants and so on, but it also is a form of hazardous waste, right? So it has to be treated separately. It should not be entering our landfills.
Great, Shawn. Thank you so much. Our next question: what are the simple and effective ways to manage your waste at home?
Okay, thank you for that question. The first thing that I will want to encourage you to do is start separating your waste, right? Depending on what mechanism. So I know my friends in the US, waste separation at home is mandatory. In Trinidad and Tobago, it is not. So, and for some parts of the Caribbean, it is not, right? So that's the first place where you need to start. You need to start looking at how can I start separating my waste, but also understanding there needs to be a mechanism for you to send your waste to. I can't tell you separate and then there's nowhere for you to send it to. That defeats the whole purpose, right? So for us, I encourage us to do two things to start off with. I'm an easy teacher. I like to give you easy homework, right? So two things: learn to compost to deal with all of that organic waste that you're throwing away, and two, separate your recyclables. The third thing is paper as well too. It's really three, but I like to start with those two things first. Why? Because the beverage containers are very bulky and occupy a lot of space in your garbage bags and so on. And two, the organic waste will naturally, as soon as you're finished with it, the process of decomposition starts immediately. So as such, dealing with those two things to start, you're going to realize that you're now going to throw away less than 50% of the waste that you've been throwing away before. I practice it at home, and you can actually, if you're a parent like me, I actually teach my children, and they find it's a fun activity. They argue with each other too sometimes, but that's okay. Go and put this. I say, okay, mommy says go and put this in the box for recycling. And my daughter, who's 7, she will go on the other day. She said, mommy, guess who didn't put his juice box in the recycling? She's talking about her little brother, who's 5, right? So I actually use that as a teaching mechanism for my children. They're the ones, my daughter is the recycling queen in the house, so she actually took it over. I don't have to do anything anymore. She knows exactly what goes in that separate bag, because for us, we don't have separate receptacles, like in the US. Ideally, your plastic bottles and so on should be put in the bin without a plastic bag. Because what happens, those that collect and process your waste, the plastic bag, tends to get caught in the moving parts of the machinery, right? But for some of us, we don't have that mechanism yet. So we have to use the plastic bags, unfortunately. But start with those two things. Learn how to compost. And what you can do too, if you have a nice neighborhood and you live in a community, talk to the other people, talk to your neighbors and see, okay guys, would you all be willing for us to do a little community composting, so that way we could share the compost, so it's no It's not on the responsibility for any one person to do, because you may be constrained by space, right? If you don't have a backyard, or you live in a condominium or an apartment complex, you don't have the kind of space, right? Even though you could compost in a storage bin, because composting could happen anywhere. And there are some really nice smaller compost bin options that I see that are available as well too. So I would tell you, start there. Start by separating your waste at home. Know what you have the mechanisms for where you are. Do you have somebody that could take the plastics? Do you have somebody that takes glass and so on? And start separating those things out and learn how to compost as well, because you are what you eat, and we want to make sure that you're eating healthy things. And I tell people, look for two things. If the vegetables are extra shiny, odds are it was grown with chemicals, right? Mother Nature, we weren't made extra shiny, so neither were the vegetables, right? When you find they're shining excessively, most of the times they're grown with chemicals. So if you can start a little kitchen garden, you know, I thought I had a brown thumb, but I realized my things growing these days, so I'm happy about that, right? But yeah, start a little kitchen garden, work with your community as much as possible, because we really, what happens when organic waste is decomposes, it releases methane gas. Methane gas is a greenhouse gas, right? And if we have that in mass, that is really going to contribute to global warming. So we don't want that. We want our planet to, you know, there's no planet B. They once thought that we could live on Mars, but we can't breathe up there. So we have to take care of this one planet that we're on. So I would say to you, start there.
Okay, great. I think I'm going to take that answer for myself too. Thank you so much.
You're
So
welcome.
following on from that question now, are there any items that we cannot recycle in our homes?
I would say yes. And that really, and the reason why I say yes is because there are certain things that we just don't have the mechanisms for. So let me give you all another teaching lesson, right? So there are 7 forms of plastic. Let's just start there. Glass is, and before I jump into that, let me go back a little bit. Glass is the only thing that is 100% recyclable. And when I say that, you could recycle glass numerous times and it will not affect the quality of the glass, right? So that's one. Back to the 7 forms of plastic. So we have 7 forms. Generally, our water bottles, juice bottles tend to be in the first 2. The first one is called PET, or polyethylene terephthalate. So that's a big word, right? And that actually is one of the 2 of the easiest forms of plastic. Number 2 is called high density polyethylene. You would normally find, like in the Caribbean, we like to make punches, and sometimes the punch bottle, you can't see all the way through, it's opaque. Another way that you could know what form of plastic it is when you look. So if you have any plastic container near to you right now, turn it over or look on its sides and you should see 3 arrows chasing each other. That is called the chasing arrows symbol. And in that symbol, you should see a number. That number in there tells you what form of plastic the item is. The chasing arrow symbol actually tells you that it can be recycled. So we have number 3, which is PVC, which is your normal pipes and stuff you use for your water, right? That's that white piping system. Number 4 is the low density polyethylene, which plastic bags are made from. Number 5 is polypropylene, or PP. Number 6 is polystyrene, which is used to make styrofoam, and number 7 is called other. So you would find that numbers 5, 6, and 7 are normally referred to as hard to recycle for 2 reasons. It's hard to recycle because the cost of the equipment to recycle those items are much more expensive than the number 1, 2, 3, and 4, or number 1, 2, and 4 especially. And because there aren't as many available markets, because remember, in recycling, people have to buy the product, right? There is a market when we talk about recycling. So it's not just taking the product and making it into flakes, but somebody has to buy those flakes to use something, right? Or to make it into resin so that it can make more plastic or whatever, right? So there are certain things that we class as hard to recycle, right? Like your yogurt containers. because you realize if you turn it over, you might see number 5. Your detergent bottles, you might see number 5. Your sometimes your oil bottles are actually number 1, but because it was used to hold oil, that has to be removed in order for the plastic itself to be recycled. And the thing with your regular plastic bottles is that the bottle itself is one form of plastic, the label is another, and the cover is another one. So you have 3 forms of plastic on one item. So there are items that so to answer that question and to make sure I'm answering it, there are some things that we call hard to recycle because there are not enough mechanisms to deal with it. I have been reading now that there's new technology coming on stream to make those typical hard to recycle items a little bit easier. But the thing is, there needs to be a market for it to be made into another product. So yes, that is the short answer. But I hope that I explained some of those things to you, because for us in Trinidad and Tobago, we only take beverage containers. So you might have the oil bottle is number 1, but you can't drink oil, right? So then what happens to that oil bottle? It ends up in the garbage, right? So you have to also understand what mechanisms are available. That too qualifies whether it can be recycled or it can't be recycled. But if we had something to deal with everything, then none of the items would be difficult to recycle. The thing with polystyrene, styrofoam is recyclable. However, once it gets contaminated with food or oils and so on, that makes it very, very difficult, right? So that's why, you know, our countries have banned it, because it's used in the majority for food containers, beverage containers. And once it gets contaminated, you can't put that to be recycled. So I hope I answered the question. If I didn't, you could always ask me it in another way.
Okay, great. I think you did, so thank you. We have a comment here. Great presentation, Shawn. Please put the slide with the comb back up for me, so maybe you can share it and I can forward it to those who are joining us today. We have another question from Gail. Could you give our retail companies some ideas on safe, sustainable packaging?
Yes, but the thing is, Gail, I would be honest and tell you that I am in 2 minds about sustainable packaging, and let me say why, right? Because you might say, but Shawn is a crazy lady, what she mean? Right. Remember, the goal in terms of sustainable waste management is to make less waste, period. If the goal is to make less waste, then we need to make sure that our solutions don't become problems. So let me explain again what I mean. Compostable food containers is the solution for its styrofoam counterpart. It is eco-friendly and so on. However, those food containers need to be managed in an industrial composting facility. If there is no such thing, then the solution just became the problem. Because what is happening is that we're now just going to have all of these compostable food containers end up in the regular waste stream, and they're just going to be tossed and end up in the landfill, just with all of its plastic and styrofoam cousins, right? So we have to be very, very careful when we talk about sustainable packaging, and to understand that whatever we're using, that it has a mechanism to be dealt with after the fact. So we're not just going to do it. Yes, I tell people, oh gosh, if you give me a choice, I would choose the compostable alternative over styrofoam any day. But the goal is, and the producers of these items tell you, it must be composted in an industrial facility. If you're doing that, would it break down over time? Probably, especially the ones that are the fibrous looking ones. The ones that tend to resemble their plastic counterparts take a very, very long time, because you need extremely high heat that comes with an industrial facility to be able to break that down. So what I would say to the retail stores is, let's look at some other options. Can we look at refilling? Can we look at incorporating reuse? Can we look at, can we use, one of my friends does jewelry, right? And I was trying to get her well, she loved the idea, it's now just to implement it. I said, well, why don't you, rather than using plastic to put your items in, why don't you look at like making little bamboo boxes? Or I have another colleague that makes little baskets out of vetiver grass, right? So if you have those items, you know, even at the end of its life, when the grass starts to get fuzzy, you could throw it in your compost heap and nothing else happens, because all it is that the grass is being platted. I don't know what other word or you guys might use for describing it. I don't have much hair, so I can't tell you. Look at my hair, right? So if the grass is being platted, at least that could go naturally, because that is not going to be, because what happens with sustainable packaging is that they're more expensive than their counterparts. That cost has to be borne by somebody, either the retailer or the consumer. But then what is going to happen with that product after? So you're going to say, yeah, we use compostable packaging, like if they're a food establishment, for instance, but it's still going in the garbage. So to me, I'm like, you know, it has to be, and I know people use it because it is, as I say, if I had a choice, I would say choose the compostable ones over the styrofoam any day, but we just have to be mindful of what is happening to it after the fact. So that's all. But there are a number of things, you know, as I say, refilling, repurposing. You know, if they buy the plastic container, can they bring it back for it to be reused several times before it becomes waste? So it, you know, there has to be an even balance between things. So I hope I answered that question, Gail. So there are a number of options that are available, but you have to look at it as part of a big picture. And what is your ultimate goal?
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Shawn. Our next question, is there any guideline for disposing of animal waste?
And when they say animal waste, do they mean it in a large way? Because normally people take animal waste and turn it into manure, right? So that's like the typical process for animal waste. But when you're talking about whole animals, there's something called mortality composting. So while I was at Cornell, Cornell has a very large vet school, and we actually have UWE has a vet school too, right? And sometimes you have to euthanize the horses, the cows, and so on. So one of the things that they were trying, other than just natural burial of animal waste, because it is, you know, what comes from the earth will return to the earth. So just normal burial for animal waste works. People turn it into, like if it's the feces and so on, that could be made into manure. And manure is not composted, guys. So just understand that there's a difference between the two. But for larger animals and animal parts, one of the other things that I've seen, especially at my experiences at Cornell, is mortality composting. So they actually use the process of composting for the animals. So they may cut the animal up into pieces and then compost them. I remember when I was there was this large bone sticking out of the heap, and I asked my colleague, I said, what's that? He's like, I think that's a horse's rib. And I was like, can I have it? So I actually have a horse's rib in my house. So my God is cracking up at me, right? So that is another technique that I've seen them use. So people bury them and plant trees because it's organic, so it will return to the earth naturally. It is what happens when we pass away. Same process, right? So if it's the feces, it's normally turned into manure. But if it's the whole part, if it's not incinerated, especially the incineration is if the animal is diseased, then another option is mortality composting. So that's another way we could get rid of the animals.
Okay, great. I think the person wanted to clarify. So they're saying at-home disposal of parts of consumed animals.
At-home disposal of
parts of consumed animals?
Parts of consumed animals. What parts of consumed animals are they talking about? Because normally you mean like when your dog dies? I don't know. Well, it depends. Normally I would just say burial, because if it's an animal and it's, you know, if you're talking about bones and so on, I would say to bury that, even though some of my colleagues, I don't encourage people to put bones in their home compost heaps, because it doesn't get, the temperatures don't get as high to be able to break down the constituents of bones, which is very complex. So I tell people, if anything, they could just bury the bones and they will naturally break down over a period of time. But instead of slowing down the process of composting in any way by putting the bones in there, I just tell them to bury it. So I hope that, so you could just bury it, yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, we have some more clarity. So food we have eaten and are now throwing away the bones, the uneaten skin, etc.
Right. So yes,
Right.
so that was my last answer. So I don't encourage putting it in the compost heap, even though some of my colleagues like to challenge me on that. But the thing is, you have to make sure that your compost heap is getting to its highest temperature, which normally is as close to 50 degrees Celsius, in order to be able to break down those bones. If not, then you can simply bury the bones if you want to. But unfortunately, the only other option you may have is just to leave it in your garbage and throw it away. Right? If you're like my husband who chews up his bones fine, then you don't have much to throw away. Then you don't have much to throw away at all. So, but yeah, so if it's finely chewed up, you can probably take the chance and put it in the heap. But if it's like, and we like cow heel and cow skin soup, and those bones are very, very tough. So putting it like that into a home composting system will take a little time. So I just tell people to either throw it away or to bury it. So those are the other options. But if you like a true bone fine, you could probably put that in your compost heap as well too. Yeah.
Okay, good. I think that answers it. Thank you. So I think we have time for one more question.
Mm-hmm.
What are the benefits of having hydroponic systems and water waste management systems in your home?
I think hydroponics systems are excellent actually, because it's a closed loop system and the water is constantly being reused. Only I think after several uses would you need to dispose of that water, and it would be rich in nutrients, so you could actually use it for your plants, right? So I think practicing hydroponics is excellent. I actually did aquaponics. I used to rear tilapia. So that's another thing about me. I used to rear tilapia. A few years ago, I had them in concrete tanks. I had a nursery, and I had 8 20 feet by 10 feet by 5 feet deep concrete tanks filled with red tilapia. And one of the things that we eventually started doing was aquaponics. So using fish water for the plants and circulating the process and so on. And very rarely, it's only if it became very, very thick, nutrient thick, and we realized that it started to pose a problem for the fish, would we dispose of the water. But yeah, hydroponics is an excellent process. So if you can build your own hydroponic system, grow your own vegetables, that's an excellent way to go as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Shawn. I will hand you back over now to Dawn.
I was saying that, Shawn, your passion and your love for your area is electrifying. It was a marvel to listen, and I want to thank you for being here today. I want to also thank Renee for taking us through those questions and answers with you. It was fantastic. We had a lot of requests for home composting, so we might just look out for that. And once again, we need to manage our waste. And I think that, Shawn, you being here today really sparked a lot of ideas. So thank you so much. And technically, we've come to the end of another MLI webinar. And I want to thank you all for being with us today, for joining in this exciting, different topic for MLI, but exciting. I want you to remember to look out for our flyers announcing our other upcoming webinars and our paid programs. And I'll see you next time. But you have to remember, please level up. Bye-bye for now.
Bye, and thank you very much, guys. Thank you for the awesome questions that you've asked. I know some of you are itching to start composting, so we will get that done as quickly as it's humanly possible. right? Because one of my goals is to create 100 composters. I want to teach 100 people to learn the process of composting. That's my own personal wish. So I'm excited to connect with you guys again. So you guys be safe, be well, and thank you.
Thanks, Shawn.
You're welcome.
Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.